Okay, so good morning, welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Regional Volunteerism Conference, a year on belonging. My name is Pam Clark-Reidenbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence. I'm your host for the conference series. We had hoped to deliver a full day of in-person workshops in the spring, but that was not possible. But the topic of belonging is so especially relevant today. We didn't want to wait to offer the program until we could gather 100+ people in person. So today we are here via Zoom to offer a series of workshops each month on the topic of belonging. We have an extraordinary lineup of speakers, but we cannot forget to thank our sponsors: Serve Illinois, Gallagher Company, and Imperial Punch. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. We ask you to remain muted through the presentation. We'll unmute you during the breakout session, and you can unmute yourself as well. And if you have questions, we ask you to put them in the chat box, and we'll try to go through those questions in the order that they're received. The format for this morning and each month includes a keynote speaker, followed by a facilitated conversation with our friends Carrie Acevedo and Martisha Brown, specific to the topic that's going to be presented. After the keynote, we're going to take a 5-minute break so you can push away from your screen, stand up and stretch, grab a cup of coffee, or whatever you'd like before we start the conversation. We hope you'll stay with us through that discussion. We know that sharing and listening are critical to understanding, and we know that understanding can lead to coming together for a common purpose and a sense of belonging for all people. So to get started, I'd like to share just a couple quotes from two individuals I enjoy reading, Brene Brown and John A. Powell, respectively. In the absence of love and belonging, there will always be suffering. And to create a world in which we all truly belong, we must understand who is included in the we and how the definition of we can be expanded to include all people. Thank you for joining us on this monthly journey of expanding the we and working to build a culture of belonging in our volunteer efforts and beyond. To kick off our series, we are truly honored to have Jocelyn Santana with us. Jocelyn is the Director of Social Justice Education at NIU. She's a native of Chicago and a bilingual higher education professional. She earned a bachelor's degree in education with an emphasis in special education and earned a master's degree in adult and higher education with an emphasis in student affairs. She is currently pursuing her doctoral degree in adult and higher education. Speaking with us on fostering a sense of belonging through awareness and bias exploration, please welcome Jocelyn Santana.
Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad that we are all here together. A couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. I would ask that if you have a video webcam, that you go ahead and turn that on. At this moment, it makes it a lot easier for engagement and just an aspect of engaging in social justice conversations and diversity conversations. It's also important to be able to see each other and be able to understand what questions or reactions we're having and things along that line. So great to see everyone. Thank you for that. And I'm just scrolling through the rest of the pages to make sure that I see everyone here. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and we're gonna talk a little bit about implicit bias today and how implicit bias contributes to reacting or responding to differences and creating and fostering that sense of belonging. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here in a minute. But what I wanted to also encourage you all to do is, if you have any specific questions, any points of reflection or thoughts, I would encourage you to add that into the chat, okay? This is as much of an important time for us to engage with each other than it is for me to just kind of give this presentation. And so if you have kind of those aha moments, I ask you and I invite you to share your thoughts with everyone. If you find yourself having a particular question, sometimes I've been doing these town hall or online type of sessions at my institution. And what we have found in terms of best practices is to have folks type their questions and send them directly to a moderator or the host or the facilitator. So I'm going to ask that you all send them to Billy and then send them privately to Billy. So then that way Billy can go ahead and just kind of feed the questions to me, to all of us, and that way you can hold on to some confidentiality or anonymity in the process that we are all together. Fair? Good? Thumbs up? We're good? All right. And I am going to encourage us to be interactive with each other, right? So, you know, give the snaps if you agree, or, whatever it is that you feel comfortable with, thumbs up, whatever level of engagement, I encourage that because if we were together, we would hear each other, we would hear the laughter, we would hear the comments, we would hear, responses. My approach to facilitation is very much interactive. And so I will have activities planned throughout our time together, and so you can just kind of anticipate that. Unfortunately, because I can't have everyone just kind of reply, maybe we can have a couple of volunteers that might want to share their perspective or their thoughts, or it might also be a reflective opportunity. So I just kind of wanted to make sure we were all in the same headspace here. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, everybody can see that? Can you see that? Yep. All right, fantastic, thank you. So as I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and talk about implicit bias and a sense of belonging. I hope that during our time you are comfortable to ask any questions. And so first I want us to start with kind of that headspace of thinking through what exactly is diversity. And so I hope that you have a pen and paper with you, or a computer that you can just kind of jot down some notes, whatever. But what I'd like for you to do is take like 2 minutes and share with me, or write for yourself reflection. What exactly is diversity? So what have you heard or learned about in terms of diversity? What messages have you received? And what have you heard in terms of challenges or opportunities? So what have you learned or heard about in terms of diversity? What is your understanding? What have you learned in terms of its challenges or the positive aspects of diversity? And go ahead and just kind of jot down your thoughts about it. Billy, I don't have my chat screen open, so, and I'm not going to open it so that I can stay focused, but just as a heads up, okay? That's weird. Oh. So I'm going to ask if there's maybe two or three volunteers that wouldn't mind their sharing kind of their reflection on what have they heard or understood or learned about diversity. And or maybe some challenges or opportunities of what diversity is. So go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
Colleen Rittmeyer had offered to share.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Colleen. I do Project Opportunity, which is for Girl Scouts. So my answer kind of pertains to that. Diversity for me is just really about including everyone. And something that I've noticed, I've been working with Girl Scouts for over 10 years, is that everybody has some kind of gatekeeping that they kind of tend to do, whether they really think about it or not. And I've seen, you know, some, not in Girl Scouts, but I've seen some people kind of try to exclude people based on things like race or ethnicity, things like that. I don't think that's as common in Girl Scouts, but so I think that maybe people in Girl Scouts kind of tend to think they don't do that, but there are, you know, a lot of leaders and things I've seen exclude girls for things like, I don't like the parents, or, you know, I don't like this girl, and I don't think that kind of thing is really fair to the girls who are just trying to serve. So I think that, you know, everybody is guilty of excluding people to some degree. And I think a lot of people think maybe they're not guilty of it because they don't do it like in a profiling way, or they don't mean to do it in a profiling way, but everyone does it to some degree, I think.
Yep. Okay, thank you for sharing. Other thoughts? One or two more?
This is Harlan Johnson. By itself, diversity does not necessarily mean the opposite of white supremacy. It can actually enforce white supremacy and institutional racism. And it can include many factors beyond race. People often mistake diversity for acceptance, and diversity does not necessarily mean true belonging.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more?
Hey, this is Carrie. I feel like diversity is really just understanding that all people are different, right? That people have different religions, and they may come from different backgrounds, and they may have a different socioeconomic situation than you do. I think diversity just simply means that you understand that there's a uniqueness to individual people, and that we have to recognize and understand that all people are different, no matter what they come to the table with, whether they can change that themselves or not.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so staying in this line of thought of diversity, how historically, when you hear the word diversity, who has it been associated to? Question for just anybody. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, color, race, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I think that's the largest kind of conversation our country has about diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I think then followed by gender.
Yes. And so historically speaking, we see a lot of diversity thinking about through race first and foremost, and specifically people of color as being diverse, and then gender. And so my question then to the group here is, why is that problematic? Anybody, jump in.
I think it's
This is Martisha. I think even as we just mentioned, with trying to focus in on top categories, whether it's minorities and then moving on to gender, we are still in some way, shape, or form excluding, thus not being as diverse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it excludes a lot of people in their thought processes. Everybody has a different idea and a different way of expressing themselves, of getting to the same end. And the concept of we've always done it this way should be sometimes thrown out the door and taken a different way.
Right. Yep.
I think when people talk about diversity, they often miss that it's about like worldview and like the previous speaker said, thought processes. It's not just that you're different because of your ethnicity or your religion or your skin. It's that you have a different experience that's valuable, and that should be valued and brought into the circle, and not just like, oh, this is a person with a different skin color. It's like, this is a person with a different worldview, and that's helpful and it's useful for everyone.
Okay. Thank you all for sharing, and I appreciate y'all jumping in, because seriously, like, it's so important to share our perspectives out there. It's one person speaking or you know, the group of us engaging with each other. And this is part of the dialogue and important of having these conversations. And so staying along and continuing this conversation about diversity. So if historically and current times, if diversity is seen as a people of color thing, because let's stay with race for a second. So let's say that diversity is a people of color thing. What does that do if you're white identifying? What does that mean for you if you are white identifying?
Isolation. You're negating a probably a treasure trove of ideas and thought processes and just friendships. You know, and it's just not good.
What are other thoughts? If you are white identifying and the thought process is that diversity applies to people of color.
It means there's a superior and inferior implicit connotation to that, right? That if you're diverse from white, then there is an implication of inferiority there.
It's also an insinuation that this is not about you. You know, this isn't about you because I white identify, and if diversity is about color, then, you know, the insinuation would be, well, this excludes me, or this isn't about me. I don't need to jump into this conversation, you know, which I'm not, of course, agreeing with. I'm just saying that, you know, when people are white identifying, they're like, well, geez, how can I jump into this conversation? It doesn't include me. Unfortunately, they feel that way.
Yeah, right. Valid points. Other thoughts as I asked that question?
I think it kind of puts the responsibility. Sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
Often it's thought of something that can enrich my life. If my life is living in a segregated world and there's diversity, that can be a very positive thing for me.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I think it kind of implies two things. One, that like I think like Carrie said, that there's some kind of superior, or Margaret said there's some kind of superiority with being white, and that that also, I think, you know, the other thing to think about is it kind of feels like, again, going back to what I said about gatekeeping, like, you know, the people who are white identifying are the gatekeepers here. And while that's unfortunate, you know, if that's the situation people are viewing, and that gives people who are white identifying the responsibility to make sure that other people are included.
Yeah, so thank you all for sharing. I think it's interesting when I engage in these conversations, I thought about diversity, and oftentimes when we position society positions diversity as a people of color or an other, right? It takes ownership away from addressing diversity and diversity issues and equity issues in society. And so diversity as a whole are individual differences, right? So it includes beyond race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, country of origin, ability, status, and religion, right? It includes personality, learning style, life experiences, and other cultural affiliations, right? And so thinking through that is really important, because as you can see, society names these as the big 8 identities, right? These are socially constructed big 8 identities. So we look at ability, race, age, all of these. And if you look at this, my question always comes into, well, do you see yourself reflected in these identities? If this is part of diversity, are you there? We're there, right? But this is how implicit bias starts to form. We start getting exposed to these concepts and notions as other. Well, it's those individual with different ability status. It's those individual with sexual orientation or different race or ethnicity. And this is more about them, not necessarily about us as a whole. Really changes how we have been educated and have thought about these identities and us. And this is where we have to start these conversations when we want to create a sense of belonging and sense of community. Oftentimes, the fallback or the comfort is, well, I treat people as people, or I don't see color, or I don't see XYZ. And all of those lead into some level of comfort, some level of bias, and really some level of cultural incompetence. Because we have to be able to see each other in order to address these societal impacts that we have. Thoughts so far? How are you connecting with how we have learned about these identities, the self-awareness piece, and the bias? How's this resonating with you all?
So our program, so you're talking about the big identities and like age. Our program is for seniors specifically.
Mm.
So like for us, just from our grant perspective, we only provide volunteer opportunities for those 55 and over. So it's already there and we have to identify that. But like, you know, statistically, we're writing a grant right now and we're looking at it, and 13% of the aging population is in poverty status, and only so much of a percentage of that population under poverty status will volunteer, right? So it's kind of like one of those things, we have to look at these identities because we have to see them to know that we're going to like serve them. So if we don't look at all of these, we can't really serve the population our grant is written for.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean we're discluding people. It means that we're going to work a little harder to reach that socioeconomic class that maybe is under poverty level. And we're working towards engaging them and making them feel like a bigger part of their community. So I don't feel like not looking at all of these is a bad thing either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have to look at them, right? That's the point. In order for us to really truly move and address societal inequities, we have to look at these and understand that we are not just one identity focused or individual, right? Like we have race and we have age and we have socioeconomic class, and depending on how they all merge together, we're speaking about intersectionality, because at those points of intersection is how impact and society has on the individual person, right? And so we're not just single focused people. And oftentimes we can get into that mindset of, oh, that person is this identity and that's the extension of what we go. But, you know, sometimes I'm just a mom, you know, like sometimes I show up and I'm a mom, but sometimes I'm a mom who's brown to 4 kids that are German, Irish, and Puerto Rican and Honduran. You know, what does that all mean? How do I make sense of that? And how do I help them navigate these world dynamics, right? And help them to understand themselves. And so these are real, legit conversations that need to be intentional to take place. So I'm going to show this video, and we're going to talk about how interesting it is to reflect on this individual's experiences.
As a black man, I'm used to having eyes on me, and I've never felt like this in my entire life. Within a few days of posting the shirt story, if you would, I've received hate mail, death threats. People will say, oh, he's the N-word, or he's this, or he's that, go hang yourself. People don't actually understand things unless you somehow try to turn a mirror on them or ask them to walk in other people's shoes. My first reaction to the shirt was actually a guy who thought it was a Redskins shirt, I imagine, because his first thing he said to me was, "Go Skins." So, like any New Yorker, I simply said, nah. And he responded by calling me an asshole and kept walking. An older white woman actually stopped me and asked me why I was wearing this shirt. And I said to her, what's the problem with the shirt? She said, it's disrespectful. Why are you wearing such a disrespectful shirt? So I responded and said, if it was the actual team shirt or some other apparel from the team, would you be mad? She said, no, because that's the logo and that's the brand, so I wouldn't be mad. There's a group of white guys across the street looking at me, no big deal, as they're walking across. One of them points at me, and then after that, they start posturing as if they're gonna come over to me. And one of the guys actually stopped the rest of the other two guys and I guess told them it's not that serious and to keep on walking. It was quite a surprise that seemingly people were ready to come have some type of actual altercation with me over my shirt. Caucasians is not a derogatory term. The image of a white man is not disparaging. There's no negative thing about the shirt. As opposed to the Redskins, that's an actual racial slur. The image of a Native American with red skin is actually disparaging. But if you're a white person in America or globally, you've never felt this before. So even if it's not a one-for-one, there's still a level of you don't have a right to do it, as if people of color, people from certain marginalized communities don't have the agency or space to make you feel the exact same way. How dare they have the audacity?
So what are some thoughts as you kind of saw this video?
I personally thought, good for him. I love the shirt, so because it brings up a point. My kids are in a school district where a Native American is our mascot, and we fight for this to be gone. But then the family fought back and said, well, this is our heritage. We want it to stay, surprisingly enough. You know, like, this is our history. So, but the fact that people got so upset over a shirt that's almost identical and has no, like, negative connotation whatsoever. It's hilarious.
Very
I went to a high school where the mascot was the Indian. So I remember there was a time in my high school where they were talking about changing it, and everyone threw a fit about how, oh no, we've always had this mascot. And I remember thinking then how stupid that was that they weren't willing to change it. So yeah, my first reaction was that I thought the snark was hilarious. And then like he started talking about his experiences, and it kind of just got like slightly horrifying for me that people would like actually react like that to him over something that, like he said, isn't even a slur. It's just an identifier. And that they really just, they can't identify with the person who is a Native American who would be feeling worse than that over this perpetuation of using what he's, like you said, a racial slur as a mascot and refusing to change. I mean, I know they changed it recently, but first, how long did they refuse to change their mascot? And they're not the only one who uses, you know, symbolism like that.
Right.
I was gonna
My
say,
thing is if it was a Caucasian male who was wearing the shirt, would they have found it funny and less offensive? Because honestly, why this is not offensive? It looks like a Caucasian male on a shirt.
I think what stood out to me was the fact that even the rankings between how we look at diversity. So for instance, even though there's a lot going on in the world right now, it'd be really hard for someone to walk outside with a shirt that said Negroes. And so we still somehow are willing to accept that there's something that is clearly showcasing some form of derogatory remark about Native Americans being compared to a mascot that could be a Viking or a pretzel. I'm just thinking about regionally in our area. So it becomes a character as if it's not truly a nationality and there's not some history backing behind that. But I just find it interesting how even within this scope, we have ranking between African Americans. That would definitely not be acceptable, but we'd allow it for a Native American.
Right.
My reaction was, oh, pseudoscience, Caucasians. Oh, yeah, that there's a whole history behind that.
Right. Right. Even the word Caucasian and white has historical differences that we're not going to get into today, but it's there.
I think that's why we are not seeing the words matter. Because if it will just be the picture, nobody will say anything. If you were to have the Redskins without the word Redskins, would have been different, because they will be say Native American, or they will know what they mean, but they will not say the word. So I think we are hypersensitive to words, and we're picking up the word, oh, Caucasian, well, you're making fun of me. Because if you take the word out, it can be an Italian, a Mexican, any other, or just a simple face of a man. But words matter. So we need to be careful with the words that we say when we say it, and for what purpose. I mean, yeah, he was trying to strike a conversation, but I think we are so hyper focused on hurting each other. You're gonna prove my point, I'm gonna prove my point this way. So we just have to be careful of, like I said, words matter.
And so Frederick really made it a point to try to say, let's turn the mirror around and let's see what happens. But what was interesting and fascinating to me is that, again, Caucasians is not a derogatory name like Redskins. It like mind-blowing, right? It really isn't. And so I went on to look at some of the comments on the feed, right? And people were like, oh my gosh, this is so hilarious that people couldn't even pause and consider the implications of what they were reacting to. Or, to really truly turn the mirror, it should have been like pale skins. And I was like, wow, like that would have been truly derogatory. And thinking through that dynamic of this bias, right? Because these are biases that exist. There was nothing offensive here, but yet these biases exist because it's stereotyping or potential prejudice of a specific group, right? And this is part of that thinking through the bias piece. Not sure how to...
The actions will change.
Here we go. All right, so what is bias? So explicit bias are attitudes or belief that one has at or endorses at a conscious level. And so I often, when I do these workshop presentations, I talk about these attitudes that are very like in your face. I don't have to guess as to whether there's a bias present. I actually like working on explicit biases because they're that much easier to identify. i.e., I'm not going to hire a person because they have, even though somebody wouldn't really say this, but maybe they will indirectly to somebody else. I wouldn't hire somebody because they are Black, or because they're white, or because they are a woman, for example, right? Those are very explicit. Or I won't hire somebody because they're trans. Thinking through those very explicit biases, they're very direct, you can identify them. But if I turn around and I say, okay, y'all, can you give me an example of an implicit bias that you have? They don't come that quickly. because the whole point of implicit bias is that it's unconscious. It's unconscious. So thinking through a lot of the issues that we have today, I strongly believe that implicit bias needs to become more conscious, and we have to work on it being more conscious to truly address the issues that we are seeing in terms of these identities as a whole that tend to be marginalized in society. These are very, very difficult to identify, and more particularly, if we hold identities of privilege, we can dismiss those thoughts or those feelings that come to mind, and just kind of make you, I wonder why I thought about that, and just let it go. Instead of digging deep and reflecting on why we had the thoughts that we had. Okay, and so before I give an example of this implicit bias, I want to move to the next slide. So implicit bias are often pervasive. So everyone possesses them, right? It's kind of like egos. You know, we all have them. They're pervasive. We don't have to look for them. They exist. And thinking through walking away from today's session, I want you all to hold on to these, to understand these. If they are pervasive, we don't have to search for them. We truly don't. They exist. And it's our responsibility to see them. That's a big difference. They are related but distinct mental constructs. So there's information that informs them. We have associations. They may not necessarily be fully linked, but they're all together. Do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs or reflect stances we would explicitly endorse. This is a huge one. So here's the example of the implicit bias. I am a social justice educator. I believe everyone should have equity and justice, right? You hear me? I believe everyone should have equity and justice. Those are my declared beliefs. That does not mean that I might not be operating under policies and practices that do not promote equity and justice unconsciously, right? I am an educator. I believe that all students should have rights to access to fair education, to representation, and yet I might be complicit unconsciously because standards are set where I'm teaching stuff that might not necessarily be factual and representative of the actual context. That starts feeling kind of really uncomfortable, right? I don't know about you, but at least for me, it starts feeling uncomfortable. Let me drive this other point. In today's society and looking at civil rights movement and what is happening, it's only a few bad apples as it relates to the police. It's only a few bad apples. You know, we have a lot of great police officers that are out there doing their work. They're doing awesome jobs. Yet you see that this individual who has the belief that they're here to serve and protect might actually be racially profiling people as they're driving and have high records of, if you look at their records, of somebody being pulled over because of racial demographics. That's uncomfortable to think about. Does this person believe that they're here to serve and protect? Absolutely. Implicitly, they might be operating under a bias though. Right? It gets kind of tricky. It gets kind of uncomfortable. Favor our in-group. This is a huge one because implicit bias in terms of sense of belonging impacts then our ability to think about and celebrate differences, because it can get comfortable to associate ourselves with people that look like us, that maybe come from the same town or community, Midwesterners versus West Coast versus East Coast. Thinking through those dynamics matter, right? Same belief systems. We're both Christians, or we identify in certain ways. And so then therefore we favor our in groups.
Give her a
We
second.
may naturally favor our own groups. These implicit biases,
Oh, she dropped.
Looks like we lost her. We'll give her a second to jump back in. She might have lost her internet.
Yeah, maybe coming back. So maybe what we could do until we hear back from Jocelyn is actually put Carrie and Martisha on the spot and begin your conversation around this topic as it specifically relates to volunteerism. Hopefully Jocelyn will be back, but are you comfortable with jumping in, the two of you?
Yeah, of course.
can you see me?
Oh, hey.
Yes.
Hey,
You
that was
are?
weird. I was like,
okay.
where'd everybody go?
We
Do
were
I
gonna
need to-
we're gonna pivot a little bit, Jocelyn, but go right, go ahead, go forward.
Can-
That sounds good.
Can you see my screen or no? It went away.
There
You
it
can
is.
see it now.
It's good.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, that was weird. Sorry. So the good thing about it is that our implicit biases are malleable, and so we can rewire our brain to make different connections based on how we've interpreted or heard or think about these different dynamics in terms of society. And so that's a really cool piece about implicit bias, is that it's not fixed. We can address that. And that gives us hope. So biases are mutually reinforcing of long-standing societal inequities. So we're about to do an activity, okay? So you see the screen up front, and we see these words, right? I want you to reflect on what these words mean. What were your immediate thoughts, what you learned, or what you've heard, not necessarily, or what you believe in, okay? So no judgments here, but what were some of your immediate thoughts? Think about it, maybe jot down 2 or 3 thoughts per each of those categories, and then we'll come back. All right, so what are some immediate thoughts that you all had? And I guess I can start off by sharing. It's probably feels a little bit safer too. So I did this activity yesterday with my partner. My partner is a 6'4" Irish German man, redhead, you know, and I'm like this 5'1", you know, brown Latina woman. It's an interesting dynamic that we have, you know, and talk about implicit biases, right? He went and dropped off our kid a couple years ago. We have 4, and our youngest is blonde haired, green eyes, you know, and then he would go and take the kid to school. And one day I said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and you know, go into work a little bit late and drop off Marcus, is my youngest, with you. And so as I'm standing next to him, the teacher's just talking directly to him, doesn't look at me at all. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And then eventually she stops the conversation with him and turns to me and says, and you are? And I was like, okay, this just got really uncomfortable. And I was like, I'm the mom. I'm not a sitter here. Like, help me out here. and the lady, oh, okay, I can see that. And so even though my kid is blonde and green-eyed, he actually looks like me. He has my face, right? Just, you know, fair complexion, but that's about it. That same day, after we drop him off, we go and have breakfast. And he drops me off at the door. I go inside. The hostess sits me and says, is it just you? And I said, no, I'm waiting on, you know, my partner. And she said, oh, I see him now. And I was like, what? And so then she looks a certain direction. And I was like, how do you know who my partner is what I'm thinking. So I turn my head and I look the same direction. And there's this little short Hispanic guy walking past. And I was like, interesting. And at the same time, my partner shows up on the other side. And I was like, that's him, not this little short Hispanic guy walking past. And so she turns beet red. And I was like, yeah, okay, learning lesson, sits down. And then after that, we, in another incident, so after those two incidents back to back, I tell you, I almost didn't go to work that day. I was like, I should just stay home because I don't know what the rest of my day is going to look like. And I'm really concerned that I'm going to keep getting these biases and microaggressions kind of impact, right? And so I think it was that very same week, I had dropped off my two other kids at the elementary school. And there was this lady who just immediately starts talking to me in Spanish. She's like, this way, be careful with crossing the street. The kids will come over here on this side. And so then I respond in English and she was like, oh, you speak English. Okay, well, so anyway, it was an interesting week to say the least, right? And so yesterday as I'm preparing, you know, and kind of going through my presentation again, my partner walks in and I said, hey, I said, what are your thoughts as you look at these items on here? And, you know, he says, Black, I think about Black Lives Matter. White, I think about privilege. Islam, I think about peaceful individuals, but also immediate association is terrorism. LGBTQ, he's like, actually one of my coworkers. And I was like, okay. Undocumented, he says, somebody that I can go and hire for the day. We have property in Chicago. And so when we go to Chicago, he's like, yeah, somebody that I can just go to Home Depot and hire for the day. I'm like, okay. He said, women, you, government, shakes his head and says, just, you know, stupid. And then he says, Christian, me, to himself. And so I thought that those interesting associations were, or those associations were very interesting. So I'm just kind of opening it up. What's your immediate thought?
Did the same thing your husband did. At first, I found myself in there, right? So like how I identified myself. But then I associated either someone in particular or maybe a specific group of people as I looked at each of those boxes. I related it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting, right?
I didn't relate them necessarily to myself, except as a woman in that category. But when I see black and white, I think of categories and expectations for that particular category in the way we have to label people today. And when I see Islam and undocumented, I feel persecution and lack of fairness in evaluating these particular groups. And the government, I cry for that because I see our democracy is in serious jeopardy at this time. And Christian, I think of categories of evangelical or Orthodox as Catholicism. On the LGBTQ, I look at that as seminars. I just think of seminars that we've had at work that seem to emphasize maybe only one category, not all-inclusive. So I think some organizations just pick out what they want to focus on. Like in my particular workplace, it was transgender, but what happens, you know, for those that are gay? that subject's not covered. So they just chose what they wanted to focus on.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
One of my thoughts is I automatically went to not what my perception is, but what the negativity of those were. So like for mine, you know, Black, this is not like, this isn't my thought process, but
you're safe. Yep.
Criminal, poor, uneducated. For White, you know, like privileged, American dream, Islam, terrorist, LGBTQ, entitled, undocumented is illegal, women are held down, our government is corrupt, and Christians are always right. Like, it was my automatic sense to go to what like the media focuses on, not my personal, you know, thoughts.
Belief, right.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it goes back to how the human brain works, is that we're just set up to compartmentalize things. It's why scientists classify things, and it goes all the way back to the Greeks who started dividing things up into groups, and we just do that. And we put things into boxes, you know, all blacks are this way, all whites are this way, all Christians are good, the government's all bad. And we just do that. So it's something we have to actively work against and realize that we are doing this, and how do we change that?
Yeah, fair.
It is funny because I saw the board, and just as E. Johnson said right now, compartment, you know, they're in a compartment. It's a block of Black, white, Islam. Why? I mean, I know that that's for the purpose of the activity, but why put them in boxes like this? Was that purposely done? And I mean, that was my brain when, like, why can't we just write the word? Why do we have to be in boxes? And so, I mean, I just was curious, was that purposely done for the, okay.
Yep, this is all part of the activity, is thinking about the imagery, thinking about the differences, the isolation.
Yeah, the colors. I mean, my brain works that way. It's like, I get to think right away, well, why is the sequence that way?
Yep.
I mean, so.
Thank you for sharing your observation. One more?
Yeah, one thing for me that I think I as I'm looking at these groups, there's for the white group there, I can see that as a group where you don't necessarily always compartmentalize those individuals. They have the luxury of not being compartmentalized. You can see a white person as a Christian just as well as a woman and, you know, leaders in government. When you look at like the Black people, the Black box, when you look at just like that type of that group of people, you kind of just have one image in your mind. When you look at Islam, you have one image in your mind. When the white box, you have a luxury of seeing a diversity of people in that group.
Yeah, it's that individualism versus that groupness. Yes. And that's also intentionally designed in society, right? And this is how we're coming back into this implicit bias conversation, right? It's how we have been socialized to see differences in individual groups outside of ourselves, and what the standards of expectations are versus that internalized oppression of each of these other categories that may not necessarily be present for individuals with privileged identities, right? So able-bodied versus unable disabilities, right? Or different abilities. Thinking through these dynamic women versus men, you know, and I use versus, you know, not necessarily as an either or, but to show the contrasts, right? Undocumented versus US citizen, you know, and all of these have very implicit associations to them. And so these aren't necessarily just words or beliefs, right? Because these aren't just like just words that are being used. These are actually these or how our mind went. These actual thoughts have a very beliefs and attitudes associated to them. And that's an interesting piece to stop and consider, that it isn't just an immediate thought, but these thoughts have beliefs and values associated to them, attitudes, in how we perceive these groups or these individuals with these identities. Because as we're having this conversation, can you imagine if I show up and I introduce myself and I say, hey, so my name is Jocelyn Santana. I'm glad to be here. I am white identifying. I'm a woman who has undocumented immigrant parents, and I believe that I am a Christian, and that I'm here to talk to you about how the government supports differences in diversity. And I'm here to talk to you about that. Now tie all these associations and meanings that we just talked about to these identities that I just kind of associated myself with, right? True or not true in terms of what I shared, who knows? But there's automatic beliefs. And this is important for us to pause and consider, because we make decisions based on these beliefs. And so, right or wrong, they're often stereotyped. Very limited experiences. And so this is why we have to take a minute to understand our brain and how our brain functions. And oftentimes I talk about this fast brain and how it's involuntary, effortless, very, very fast in our thinking, and it operates subconsciously, right? So this is the difference between the fast brain and slow brain. Is when we first started learning how to drive, slow brain, we sit down and it's very deliberate in thinking about, okay, I just sat down in the car, next step, let me check the mirrors, let me adjust the seat, let me turn on the car, let me look back, let me hit the gear change, I'm gonna drive, right? And so you're consciously thinking through those steps because it's new. Fast brain, a year later, 2 years later, 6 months later, you're like, I got this. You don't even have to think about it. You put the car in, you go and you start driving. Make sense? So this is how the fast brain works, slow brain works. 2 + 2, 4, right? Slow brain says, yeah, I accept that answer. Go with it. But if we want to start addressing implicit bias, this is where we start. We start in challenging what messages we are thinking, what messages we have received, slow our thinking down so that we question what we are seeing or what we are processing, rather than just accepting what our fast brain says. Oh yeah, I recognize that, you do this. Does that make sense? And so we have to be very deliberate. And activating our slow brain, it's lazy. It really is. It just accepts. It accepts what we see. It accepts immediate thinking. But if we want to be deliberate in addressing implicit bias, we have to slow down our thinking and understand, why are we doing what we are doing? What is the belief behind what we are doing? Is there any implication to those individuals that we are interacting with that might be unjust or inequitable? So here's a little math activity, if y'all like math.
I'm curious about the word lazy in that, or with slow brain, that seemed not to fit.
Lazy, it's lazy because fast brain kicks in first. It goes automatically thinking. And so your slow brain will say, oh yeah, I accept that, we're good. It doesn't want to engage in it. It doesn't process it. That's why it has to be deliberative.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So here's this activity. I want you all to do some math. A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I know, I got us doing math at 9:30 in the morning. A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Okay, give me some of your answers.
No way of knowing.
No way of knowing. Okay, what are some other thoughts?
5 cents.
5
Yeah,
cents.
some people are saying 5 cents in the chat box.
Okay, what are other thoughts? Anybody?
I only have 1 cup of coffee, but I said 10 cents.
10
but-
cents.
I'm going 10 cents,
I'm going
Marquise.
10 cents.
Yeah.
10 cents.
10 cents.
Well, I mean, I know 1 cup of coffee,
10
though.
cents.
10 cents.
Team
10 cents.
5 cents. Team 5 cents.
Team 5
10
cents. Team 10 cents.
I'm on team 10 cents.
I'm on team
All right,
10 cents too.
check
All
it
right,
out.
Teresa, we got this.
A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? If the ball costs, if you said 10 cents, and the bat is $1.10, but I only asked for $1 more, you just gave me $1.20. Do you see that? Example of fast brain and slow brain, y'all. Fast brain said, oh, it's $1 more, so it's 10 cents. You just accepted it. Slow brain deliberately pauses and thinks about it and says, wait, hold on. It's only $1 more. If it's $1.10, has to be 5 cents, right?
Team 5 cents for the win. Bad, Martija. Bad.
So what does that do to your brain? I mean, besides like, oh my gosh, did we really just do math? And what does this have to do with implicit bias? But what does that do for your brain right now as you kind of see these numbers laid out?
Make you slow down and think.
Makes you slow down and think. What are some other thoughts?
That I suck at math.
I think it means that we all tend to make rash judgments on who we're looking at, as opposed to what looking that the people can bring to the table or to the program. We're looking at who they are right in front of us, not what their skills are.
Did my 10 cents folks have a moment to sit there and say, hold on, let me check this math. Are you sure?
A little too tired for that right now. And I knew you guys were going to be doing the answer, so I wasn't overly concerned. If it had been a different situation, I would have thought through it. If there hadn't been anyone in place to check my math, I would have, thought through it more. But I knew that the answer would be revealed soon, so I wasn't too worried.
I couldn't even wrap my head around the math. I was like, word problems and dollars and this. Like, I got in an argument with my grade school math teacher. He used to tell us that we'd never carry a calculator around in our pocket. And I saw him and I was like, haha, guess what I have in my pocket? And he was, so like math is not my thing. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. And I'm going to look away now because I'm ashamed that I can't do math. Like,
but isn't that interesting, your association and what it linked to, right? It has impact. Oftentimes when I do this activity, I have folks that will sit there and say, yeah, no, you're wrong, and argue with me, even though I'm presenting the information and the math right there in front of folks, and say, no, it's 10 cents. Your math is wrong. I'm like, okay, and I keep going back and forth between the slides. And oftentimes when we are confronted with a different narrative, it causes some cognitive dissonance. Right? It causes us to pause and consider and think about this impact of what we are seeing, what we are processing, and how do we slow our thinking down to actually see what is in front of us.
That's exactly what happened to me. I immediately looked at the puzzle and I was like, oh, it's 10 cents. And then as soon as someone wrote in the chat box 5 cents, I was like, 5 cents plus 105. Oh, 5 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As soon as I saw the question and 10 cents came immediately to mind, I knew I was wrong because it couldn't be that easy. But I was fast brain thinking and like you, I think the lazy does apply to slow brain because my slow brain wasn't, I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait and see how I'm wrong. I knew I was wrong.
And you accept it, right? I mean, that's the learning opportunity in this activity, is that we accept it. So it's something to definitely be aware of and think of. And so so I thought that that was a really neat experience. And so I'm going to end us with this last slide because of time. But hopefully, oops. All right, let me escape out of here. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So it says these individuals are passing the t-shirt count. How many white t-shirts are there?
That's not the slide we see, Jocelyn. We see debiasing.
Slide 16. I think you want slide 14 maybe?
Hold on a second.
And it's not full screen. It's got the small things on the left.
Can we stop sharing?
Yeah.
And then let
You want to
me
recast it?
Yeah, I'm gonna resend this. Okay, so let me see. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Answers.
Okay, can you see the video?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me restart it. So you want to count how many white t-shirts are present.
White t-shirts
Mm-hmm.
or gorillas?
Okay, so how many white shirts?
3.
3.
Did anyone count the passes?
No.
No.
Did anyone see the gorilla come through?
Yeah.
Yep.
Did anyone see the color of the background change?
Yes.
No.
No.
Yes. No.
So if you're looking at this, oftentimes what I have found is, okay, I'm trying to get back to the screen. Oftentimes what I have found is that folks will pay attention to either how many times the balls are being passed, or they're paying attention to just the t-shirts and that's it, and that they missed a gorilla. And some folks will miss the fact that the color in the background changed. And so this is how our mind focuses. It's like if you're given a specific instruction, you pay attention to that, but you might miss other details that are around us. And so being aware of our biases causes us to do very intentional work in thinking through how those dynamics show up. So I will send this PowerPoint slide with Billy to Billy, and at the end, you will notice that I incorporate some strategies on how to do debiasing work. The good thing is that we can focus on strategies to debias, which includes like contact with other folks, questioning the policies that we are doing or interacting with, thinking through kind of those belief systems that we hold that kind of reinforces our thinking, and the like. And I think that this is important to be mindful of, is to be aware that you know, there are ways for us to think about countering stereotypes, thinking about ourselves, to develop that empathy of what would it feel like if somebody held those stereotypes for ourselves and the like. So I will stop talking because I know that there's moderator and questions, and so I want to also respect that time as well.
So thank you very much, Jocelyn, and expanding our thinking. Maybe just closing words of wisdom to this group, which is focused on volunteerism, recruiting, retaining, and diversifying our volunteer force, and how you would suggest, as the information that you shared might be utilized within the context of volunteer development.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were asking the group. Say that one time.
So the group that's the Volunteerism Conference, right? This is the start of our Volunteerism Conference. And so many of the folks in this room are spending time recruiting, retaining volunteers as a crucial part of the services that they provide. So sharing the information that you did is extremely valuable and relevant in this particular field, but perhaps you could just share a few words of wisdom on how it might be used directly in that field.
Yeah, so first I would probably say is the importance of thinking through the individuals that are in the space, and so that we are interacting with. I think it's so important to acknowledge differences and not just, again, try to hold on to not seeing those differences, and acknowledging differences in the space. And so, and being comfortable with yourself to acknowledge your own identities. That's also important too. I will appreciate somebody that is showing me that they are doing reflection in their own work, and being able to own when mishaps happen. I think that if you, particularly nowadays, I'm seeing that if you have a white identity or if you're white presenting, there's a lot of fear of being called a racist. And I want to just acknowledge that up front, because I think that that impacts then how folks maneuver and work through conversations of differences, and the impact of effectiveness. And so I often say you don't have to know everything, but because I don't, but it's important to acknowledge those differences. And when you make mistakes, to say, hey, I messed up, listen, own it, and do differently.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we will, we're going to continue this conversation next month too, where Shiraz Tata is going to take a deeper dive into implicit bias. So we hope that you'll join us again next month. But I'm going to ask each of you to thank Jocelyn for her time. Let's thank her, raise your hands, give her a little, how much we appreciate the time that you spent with us, Jocelyn, and opening our thinking as we expand and work to build a culture of belonging in our community and within our organization. So thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For those of you that are going to stay for the conversation, we hope you'll all stay for the conversation with Carrie and Martisha. We're going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to grab another cup of coffee, stand up, stretch, push away from your screen if you need to, and then we'll kick it off with those two very soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Jocelyn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point, Colleen. Good point.
I might not be able to add 10 cents, but I can do that math.
As soon as someone said 5, I was like, oh, you were totally wrong.
Yeah, I knew it was way too easy.
Yeah.
I knew it was way
Yeah.
too easy. So
Yeah.
I knew I was wrong, just didn't know how.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing where, like, if I'd seen it on Facebook, I would have stopped and thought about it. But I was like, you know what? It's okay. They'll tell me why I'm wrong. I'm too tired for this.
Yeah. Yep. all those Facebook pictures or memes that have like, you know, little ducks with them or, you know, whatever. It's like, this tennis shoe is worth this many points.
Variable.
Yeah.
Or the whole, is this white or yellow or beige
Oh.
or what was that?
So weird.
All
My
about
husband and I
perception.
still argue over a hoodie color he had in high school.
Funny. Yeah.
If I lost it, so we'll never know who was right, but I know I'm right.
We're always right.
Of course, yeah. Well, my other trump card in this is he's slightly colorblind. Not in the spectrum where we're arguing over this color, but he's still slightly colorblind, so it's, you know, I win.
Yeah. So Carrie, I totally duped everyone. I said I was going to work from home today, and I got here pretty early, and they're all walking by because most of the lights are off, and they just see the lights here in the meeting room. They're like, did you sleep here? Weren't you supposed to work from home?
That's funny. I've been, you know, I've been splitting my time. I just recently started coming back to the office, and so I'm doing like 2 or 3 days a week. And so months ago, like in March, I took out all of my keys out of my purse, like my office keys, and like they're in like this little jar in my kitchen. And today I got here before anybody else got here, which is super surprising because I'm late every day. And so I had to like go next door to the people who own the building and be like, can you let me in my office?
Oh, hey, I won't judge. I still can't. I know my office keys are somewhere at home and I still can't find them. We just happen to have a keypad and have that number memorized. So
yeah.
All right, you two ready to get going, Carrie and Martisha?
Sure.
All right. I feel as though I don't need to do introductions for the two of you, but to respect you, I will do that because you're so well known in the community. But we cannot be more grateful for your willingness to facilitate the discussions after each one of the presentations for the next year. We so appreciate that. And so to introduce the two of you, Carrie Acevedo is the Executive Director for Rockford Area Habitat for Humanity. I still struggle, Carrie. I want to call you Carrie Nelson.
It's okay.
You've always been that. Thank you for being here. And Martisha Brown, too. I'm Director of Advancement at the Rockford Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. Enjoyed working with her on the Lunch Chat series, fantastic series during the beginning of COVID, educating organizations, businesses in the community on various issues and things that were happening in the community. So the two of you, we deeply appreciate your time spent with us, and I turn it over to you.
Thanks for having us.
I will say this, Carrie, I absolutely love that in our picture we coordinated and we didn't even know. So that just lets me know that we truly have a friendship.
We do. That's awesome. So first of all, thank you all for being here. Several of our committee members for the Leadership Exchange on Volunteerism are on the call. I saw Leah, I see Pam, Kim Mickey, several people who have helped us put this conference together for the last couple of years are on the call. So I want to give a shout out to them. In March, we had to pivot, pretty significantly. We were planning to have, well over 100 of you in the room and have this like really fantastic dialogue. My mom has always said, God works in mysterious ways. And I agree with that because shortly after we decided to take this one-day conference into a year-long conversation about belonging and diversity and equity and inclusion, George Floyd happened. And this conversation became the forefront of many of our organizations. Many of us work in social justice, in social service agencies. And so I feel really honored to get to be a part of this conversation. My implicit bias that is happening in my brain right now is, I'm sure there are people thinking, why is the very pale-skinned white lady having a conversation with us about diversity? So, right, I've worked a lot in social justice. I work for Habitat for Humanity, but I also recognize in myself that I have a lot of work that I have to do. So I'm gonna acknowledge that from the very beginning. There are things that I'm gonna not know how to answer. There are things that we're gonna have discussions about and conversations about that are gonna make us uncomfortable. And that's okay, because change doesn't come from being comfortable. Change comes from being uncomfortable. And so as organizations that work with volunteers and who are leading the fight in our organizations for a better, more equitable world, we have a responsibility. And so we're gonna try to help lead that discussion. So Martisha and I have come up with kind of a list of questions. So the first thing we want to talk about, and we also, like Jocelyn, like to see your faces. So I know we can only see like 25 people at a time, but if you can turn your cameras on, that would be awesome. We'll try to manage the chat box as people kind of give answers. We can't see everybody raise their hand, but if you want to add some things to the chat box, please feel free to do so. Unmute yourself, have conversations, scream our names if you want to interrupt. So tell us, what's your aha moment? Like, what were the things that she said in her presentation that made you think, oh, I never thought of it that way? Where did your aha moments lie?
I guess I'll talk because I talk all the time. But like my aha moment was actually in particular to one, the way that I thought about a certain individual that was actually part of the discussion today. And I always thought, how does that person have the right to speak up about inequality in regards to, other races? He's this privileged white gentleman. Like, how, and this was my bias until like that conversation, how does he have the right, like, look how privileged we are. And then I realized that if it weren't people for like this individual speaking up, it would only be a one-sided conversation. So it was like a growing moment for me. Like, I was like, oh, that's why he does it. And kudos to you, Harlan, because you're on here. But I really respect what you do and how you speak up, because it does mean something.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Kristen, that is that I really appreciate those comments, and I've had a lot of these conversations and how important it is to get to a point of allyship and understanding that the goal is not for those who would be deemed diverse to fight for justice alone, but really those who have the privilege to be spokespeople and communicate and share and be advocates and be allies. And so I'm really, really glad at that aha moment. I had that aha moment a couple of years ago myself. So even as a Black woman, so I appreciate those comments.
And it gives me like the comfort level to speak up, for injustices too. Like, I've always just kind of felt like, well, who am I to say anything? Why do I have that right? I haven't encountered that. So like the alliance part of it is really, I'm growing in that.
Good, thank you.
Anyone
Who else had
want to share their
aha
ally?
moment?
Or anyone? You're so great at Carrie.
Every time.
My aha moment was when she had the boxes and the labels in each of the boxes, and someone had asked, was that intentional? And then the more I thought about it is how we put boundaries on things and on people, and how fluid those really are. I mean, you're not just white, right? You're other things, and how we tend to, one thing jumps out and becomes the definition of a person rather than the complexity of all of us.
I share that same with the boxes. That was my aha moment, because that's exactly what we all have done, and some of us, we have to get away from that. And so that was my aha moment. I really liked that activity.
Awesome. Amanda, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to say I'm from the Quincy Arts Center. I this is my first time hearing about you guys, so I'm excited to be here. But I thought my aha moment was when she was discussing how society automatically thinks or considers people of color to be in that diverse category.
Yes.
And I hadn't really thought of that. Like, it is true, we automatically put them in the category of the diversity, but we don't put ourselves as white people in that category. And I hadn't really thought about that before. And I just thought, wow, like, yeah, I am kind of putting myself above them unintentionally, and I shouldn't be. So I just thought, yeah, that's something that I should be aware of. And so, yeah.
I feel the same way about that conversation. Harlan, I see your hand. I felt that same way about that conversation about who is diverse, because I mean, it insinuates that you're diverse from, you're more diverse from something, right? Or someone. And in this case, right, for most Americans, diversity refers to, you know, people of color. And so that means you're diverse from Caucasian. It's a really interesting way of looking at it. I never thought about it that way until today.
Yeah.
Harlan, go ahead.
Yeah, with the boxes, my initial, I'm looking at them and then I come across undocumented. And then I think, oh, these are all relatively neutral terms. They're not strongly pejorative. We don't see the N word here, and we don't see other, you know, really strong negative terms like illegal. and that one word shows a choice to have a more neutral term for people who are inevitably labeled. And out of an nonviolent communication perspective, I believe that all labels can be off-putting and can alienate us from each other. And yet at the same time, it's often necessary for us to categorize people in different ways for reasons that help us to function better.
Yeah.
Challenge.
Right. Ruth, go ahead.
I am in a category that was not listed in the box. I'm 80 years old, and I just recently heard of a friend who tried to volunteer for an organization here in Cook County, which is where I'm from, and was told we don't take anybody over the age of 60. So COVID has certainly exacerbated ageism in our society, and I just want to reflect that ability is not necessarily connected to a chronological number.
Agreed. I also felt that age was, I was surprised to not see age in one of those boxes, or something in reference to age, right? Like millennials or boomers, or yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, your organization. So what did you, given the conversation that we're having today and the conversations I assume that many of us have had prior to today's conversations, what are some of the things, action steps or things that you're going to implement in your organization based on the conversation you heard today?
I think the main
we're all.
takeaway.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead first, and then Barb will come back to you.
Sure, I was just going to say that I'm going to be looking at diversity more in the context of what is our current pool of whatever volunteers, donors, and how can we be how can we be diverse, not in this kind of stereotypical way, but how can we be diverse in like looking at what we lack in our pool of human resources for the organization.
Great point. Barb, go ahead.
In my group, I volunteer for the Will County Forest Preserve District, and I'm a specialist, recruitment specialist team member. And in our organization, we have family groups with little ones from the age 3, 4, 5 years old on up to, Ruth, come on and join us. We have people in their 80s volunteering with us. We'll be more than happy to have you. We have a really diverse volunteer base. We have young, old, different ethnicities. We have a few that are differently abled, and we always seem to find a place for them. And if we don't have a place, we create one. We're embracing a lot of different people, and it's just amazing how we all get to work together to a common goal, and it's fabulous. And to see these volunteers stay and blossom is just amazing.
So we have a couple statements in the chat box. Renee said, I'd like to forward or at least talk about the presentation with my recruitment specialist team and coordinators. So I think that there's, you know, a constant conversation about education. Just because you're here today doesn't mean your job stops, right? So you have to now carry the torch, and you have to be the person who helps educate the people at your organization. And Candace has said, I think asking questions of myself as well as others, asking others if they are willing to help on certain matters. I think that's a really great point as well, that we have to ask ourselves some really tough questions, and we have to be, you know, willing to ask those questions of others as well.
And Carrie, I think that's a good segue to just kind of move into what barriers do you currently see at your organization in being able to accomplish some of the goals and move forward? What are some of those barriers? And maybe we can all chime in on how we can help each other to overcome that.
You know, I'd like to just as part of that question, I think, Martisha, something that continues to surface for us is we hear nonprofit organizations say that they really want to diversify their board of directors, that they want more people of color to be on their board of directors. And so how do I find that? How do I find a Black woman on my board? You know, how do I get, and they want to make, and I think there's value and certainly good intent in that statement. But what I've experienced and seen over and over again is not that you cannot train anyone to be on any board. It's that they don't feel they belong once they get there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, you know, and I see people nodding, and I think that that's many people's experience. How do we not only get to the point that we have an adequate number of trained individuals to be on boards, but once that people of color especially get on those boards, or someone from the LGBTQ community get on that board, that they feel as though they own that board, that they're part of that board, and that they're a valued member of that board.
I absolutely agree with that, Pam, and I'll just share just a couple key insights with you all, especially surrounding recent events within our region. I have a lot of friends that are just saying, I don't know how to get involved. I haven't been engaged to get involved, or they feel, and specifically minority individuals speaking from that place, I feel like I have to have a certain degree, or I have to have a certain level of prestige to be involved in these organizations. And I would just encourage that if you do feel that there's that type of bias within your board development process, that you really become open-minded to include people based off of their skill sets, based off of their perspectives, and not based off of their titles. That way you won't have the same, I almost say, recycled minority leaders on every single board. I don't know if that's the same within the different communities that are here. We have to engage, and you have to be willing to include them for their skill sets and not just their titles.
But also, I think there's a lot of education of the majority folks that are on the board, right? And the implicit bias that might occurs as people of color join those boards.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Harlan.
I want to encourage you to join me on 3 o'clock on Saturday at Fairgrounds Park Pavilion, where there's a teach-in sponsored by the Rockford Youth Abolitionists and the May 30th movement, because you'll meet a lot of people who don't fit within your own category of folks, and you probably will not experience yourself as belonging in that group. And at the same time, it gives you an opportunity to meet people and have them meet you, and then also maybe learn about your organization. You know, that we really, the people who don't seem to be belonging to almost all the groups we're in are people under 25, or maybe under 20, and many of them who have a great deal of wisdom and knowledge and computer literacy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anisha put in the chat box, Pam, that she agrees with you on that. I will echo that sentiment. You know, we have a long-standing history of our board of directors looking exactly the same. We have a little bit of an internal joke around here that you can't volunteer for Habitat unless your name has one syllable in it. Because we have a lot of Bobs and Eds and Teds and Bills and right. And so for us, it's not necessarily the recruitment piece that we're struggling with, but it's once we get people of color on the board, how do we ensure that their voice matters and that their voice is equal to those of privilege? So anybody have any, Anisha, do you want to, yeah, Anisha, do you want to expand on that? Yeah.
Sure. So, some of the things that, experienced in terms of board diversity is really around my bylaws kind of state that we have a certain amount of board members who are from leadership positions, meaning because of the positions that they hold, they now have a seat at the table. And so that's a mix of large corporations, a lot of our leaders, mayor, one of the chairmen here in our community. That to me, by and large, we look at the landscape of a lot of the leaders of large organizations, they are not diverse or as diverse as they should be. So, per my bylaws, I'm already setting up a framework of the lack of diversity that sits at the table. And when we serve a public school system that is highly diverse,
yes,
does not reflect the community that we serve. And so just even having that conversation with businesses and leaders in our community about, making sure that they promote diversity and encourage diverse leadership within their own organizations, I think is key as well.
Yeah.
That way as well, they can develop certain skill sets. They can really, start to learn how to develop strategy, execute, implement in certain areas. But if they're not given those opportunities to do that and to grow, then we are kind of, fighting up against a brick wall there. So that's kind of wanted to expand on that. Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Anita.
Or just, getting them on board, training them to be treated just as equal as their counterparts. Sometimes they just don't feel, they feel inferior if they do get on these boards, being treated equal.
I absolutely agree, Teresa. That's definitely that, not just giving a seat at the table, but making sure that you actually give a voice at the table.
Right.
And there's a big difference between that. And I think that does lie on training fellow board members or even who's leading the volunteer crew so that they understand that that voice is very important. Absolutely. Appreciate all.
So we have a couple of comments in the chat box I want to look at. Jennifer says, one of the first observations I made when I started at my organization was how white our staff and volunteer base was. I know diversity is more than just about race, but I think it's important to have all types of people as part of the organization. The challenge for us is that our suburb is mostly Caucasian, so technically our organization does reflect the community. It's an interesting, we've been having that conversation internally, both about our staff and our volunteers, our board members. Do we reflect those we serve and those who, get to go through our program? And more importantly and more well-roundedly, do we reflect our community? And the answer for us is absolutely not. So it's definitely a hard process to fight. Renee says VSN is working on diversity awareness and speakers are being recruited to address the issue. So that's awesome. Great action item for any organization is simple, right? Training. Invite people to this conversation. Get involved with NICNE's conversations, that we're having around the community. Talk to other nonprofit organizations and leaders that both within your community and within your, maybe the same type of work that you're doing, and see if, some collaboration can be done in terms of education. Kim asks, how do you get leadership buy-in? Martija, will you answer this? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll share with you actually a technique that we're doing rather I shouldn't say technique, but an approach that we're doing right now at our agency. I've kickstarted a focus group that includes diverse individuals. And I've taken this particular perspective, not per se that our CEO is not open to making changes and being more inclusive and diverse, but sometimes leadership needs to hear it from the community and the population that you serve versus it solely coming from you. So I would strongly encourage that you see if there's some type of way to either gather those opinions through a survey format, through direct engagement, or some type of focus group that can really help you to identify ways that you need to become more diverse and more inclusive. Right now, we're probably in our 4th or 5th meeting with this group. And from that standpoint, we're gonna do exactly what Anisha kind of led on to there, is implementing the recommendations of that committee into board monitoring reports. So at that point in time, it means not only are we taking a stance, but we're taking something that's sustainable and something that our organization will continue to be measured by, and that allows for that continuous buy-in. So again, just reiterating, I encourage that don't allow yourself to be the sole voice alone. Let the population that you serve communicate what you need to do to be more diverse and inclusive. Any other ideas of what you're doing at your agency and suggestions on getting leaders to buy in?
A couple people in the chat box said that's great advice. Well said. Yeah. Catherine, did you have your hand up, or are you just adjusting your speakers? Okay. Every once in a while, when you see someone's hand do this, you.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to another question here. And as Carrie alluded to earlier, these are conversations that are going to be uncomfortable. We all admit that they're going to be uncomfortable. So let's just be open and honest. What made you feel a little bit uncomfortable in this conversation, and what made you look internally on things that you might want to change? So again, what made you feel uncomfortable during the conversation, and what made you look internally on things that you personally would want to change? And I can give you a quick example here. I know for me, when she showed the t-shirt with Caucasian, it really gave me the realization, even though my grandfather was partially Native American, that I, for some time period, had no problem with mascots that were representing that particular group. I didn't have a problem with it. And even seeing that t-shirt, that's wrong. That's wrong. So it made me look internally in the mirror at, when I'm looking at diversity, it's not just what I identify with, which is being an African American or Black woman. It's throughout our entire community and the diverse community that we have. So is there anything that you guys found that kind of made you feel uncomfortable? Amanda, did you have something there?
Yeah, I think that when she asked us to do the activity about looking at the different labels and what your immediate thought was, I was scared to make any comments, honestly, just because like I don't really have any terrible affiliations with those or anything. I just thinking about what other people think about those categories and what the social media discusses with those, it just made me sad to think about how people are put in these categories and what that means specifically. Yeah, that's why I didn't make any comments on that, but I agreed with everything you guys were discussing on the comments. Yeah, but it was uncomfortable for sure.
I spoke up during that part, and I said things that I was uncomfortable saying, but felt like I needed to justify that those weren't my thoughts. Like you're bombarded with those thoughts, you're bombarded with those opinions, and but like me being a white woman in a group of mixed people, I felt very uncomfortable saying, but I also felt like if somebody doesn't open that door, and say those things, like that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing in the media. That's not necessarily my thought process, but like I have an 18-year-old daughter who takes in all these opinions and things like that, and all of a sudden those are her own opinions without the facts. So like I just, you know, those are the words we're bombarded with. Those are the images, and it made me uncomfortable that it made me so uncomfortable that I might make somebody else uncomfortable by what I said. So there was a lot of like mixed emotions, but I'm glad that I said it because it really, I feel like it opened up like my, like all the things that I hear, you know, like this is what I hear, but not what I think.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Kristen. Harlan, did you have something that you wanted to add there?
Well, I have a discomfort with the very structure of this entire event. Besides Matt and me, there are no other males here. And this is something that has a tremendous amount of importance and impact with all the organizations in our community. And I would expect that women are not all the key people who are involved in these organizations. And where are the men in your organizations and why are they not here? I hope you're feeling a little uncomfortable.
Arlen, all I have to say is welcome to corporate world for women. This is usually the opposite for us. It's usually the majority men
I
and
know
the
that.
minority women. So non-for-profit sectors and volunteerism is actually one of the few places in the world where we're the majority.
Right.
I think it's important. I wanted to just share that early on in my career, I had a mentor who was willing to have conversations with me about, she was African American, and I would try, whenever I would say anything, she would correct me and I would say, okay, explain why that's offensive or explain a better way. And I, as you were saying, Kristen, you were, or someone was saying they were fearful to say anything. And that's where a lot of us live, is in that fear of saying something, rather than being in a safe spot where we can say something and then be corrected, or have someone that cares enough about you to say, okay, I understand what you're saying, but this is why that's offensive, and maybe next time you could say this instead. And so I thank the Lord for Paulette and her willingness to educate me. And that's so much of what, in every aspect that of diversity, we just need to educate ourselves and educate those around us. And unfortunately, we do live in fear, but if we didn't live in fear, I think we would all be able to learn more.
Well, I think that we have a society that are too easily broken. We don't have a strong personality, strong minds. A lot of our youth is very easy broken. And for adults, older people, or the older generations, are strong, thick skin, and are able to say things differently than the younger generation. And I think that's where we collapse with each other, because sometimes we say something and it's offensive to somebody else, but nobody's able to say anything because they will be shamed, they will be shut out, they will be, excommunicated sometimes, because they will say something that is not what somebody else think is appropriate or correct, or is just offensive in some way. But at the same time, we are biased to those people and their views and their way that they are. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to be able to love each other enough to be like, okay, so you have these views. Let's see, now you can hear my views without us being so critical and so, ready to put people on the stage and just banish them, banish them from Facebook, banish them from your groups of friends, and shame them, and how dare you, and that's why we live in such a fear, and this is why we are in our country the way we are, because people are afraid to say something. If you put up a sign of, I don't know, I believe in this politician, I'm going to vote for this politician, they will come and burn your house. This is not right. We have to have the right to think differently and to be able to work with these people and say, hey, why do you think this way? But we have lost that. We have lost the respect for other people's minds and opinions. And I think that we have to go back to that, to respect other people's opinions without losing your mind about yours. And then if we do that, we become entitled. So they just switch to the other side, right? So your entitlement is my detriment. So we have to be able to learn how to love and to live with one another with the different opinions. Because
we've certainly moved away from civil discourse.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and respect.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but this is like something my grandmother would have said, but about video games, right? But like, social media has given us a platform to be uncivil. And what we say to someone's face is very different than what we can say behind a screen. And so we've moved away from this idea of civil discourse to requiring a safe space. So I'll say this is a safe space. This is a place where you can ask questions and you can ask opinions, and we can have civil discourse. But what we're finding is that civil discourse doesn't exist everywhere amongst everyone. And so what ends up happening is that when you're not in a safe space and you do disagree and you know you can't have a civil conversation about it, you sit in silence. And silence is the language of the oppressor. And so we've been forced now into this conversation, into tougher conversations, and then only, trusting a small group of people to have conversations with. Martija and I I was lucky enough to have Martija sit on our board for a short period of time before taking her position with the Rockford Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. And she is a confidant of mine. I feel the same way about several other leaders in our community that I can have honest conversation with, but I don't feel that way with everyone. And even those sitting at the table at my board of directors. And so we have to find a way as individuals. We have to take responsibility for civil discourse. We have to stop with hate speak, and we have to ensure that we're listening to everyone. And that isn't a collective. That is, if each of the 70 some people, how many are left? 54 people still. All 54 of us decide today that our action item moving forward is that we are going to engage in kind, thoughtful, considerate conversation with people and no longer remain silent, then those around us will feel empowered to do the same. And then those around them will feel empowered to do the same. And then what started with this small group of dedicated people can become a tidal wave throughout our community. It's no one's problem but our own. We have to engage in civil discourse with each other.
Absolutely. And Teresa, did you have something you wanted to add, Teresa? I saw you were unmuted there.
I just want to say I think and believe that the older generation, the older people are the ones. I mean, because they've been through decades and decades of white superiority. And I think the younger generation now it's a more of a melting pot where you see a lot of interracial activity. And back then, with the old, it wasn't. You didn't see a whole lot of interracial activity, black and white or Hispanic or whatever, mixed nationalities. But now today, so I think, and the older people they're set in their ways. They feel a certain way, and like I said, I believe the younger generation now, it's a different. As far as, like I said, the melting pot is more interracial couples. And so I think it's more the older generation that are set in their ways and not the younger ones.
I think on both sides, Teresa, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
for people who have lived with privilege their whole life,
Yeah.
by no fault of their own, they feel like they haven't added to the problem. And I think older generations of people of color have, you know, been victims of micro and macro aggressions for so long that it almost just becomes, you know, for some people it becomes, I just have to deal with it. This is what I have to do. Yeah. Harlan, I see your comment. What about getting in good trouble? I appreciate the tribute to John Lewis. Yes, we have to get in good trouble.
I'm an outlier.
We have to be
Older people.
that what?
I and L.T. Wilson are outliers as far as older people are concerned.
You are an outlier as far as older people.
That was given about older people.
Yeah.
Harlan,
So
I
Billy,
think your microphone is covered up.
And I don't like to call them older people. I like to call them seasoned.
Seasoned. I like it, Teresa. I like it. I feel seasoned.
Old, right?
The amount of gray hair I have makes me feel a little seasoned.
I like that.
Yeah. So Billy, I know, and Pam, I know we just have a couple of minutes, and I think you have some final wrap up kind of housekeeping things you want to do. So let me first say thanks for an incredible discussion. We will look forward to seeing you next month. Martisha and I are happy to engage in conversation post each of the trainings and have some of those difficult conversations and brainstorm ideas of ways that together, you know, we can make great change in our communities.
And we like to say thank you, Carrie and Martisha, for your commitment to this conversation and the others that will follow. I also want to say thank you to the Exchange on Volunteerism team that is helping to put this conference together. If you're on that planning team, raise your hand because we want to give you credit for all that work.
Thank you.
And we will continue next month, as I said, with Shiraz Tata. You know, the one thing that I've also realized as I get older is that patience is not one of my virtues. And so I'm thinking, oh, Martisha, let's have a conversation. Maybe we need to make some Caucasian t-shirts. And then we need to train and begin to walk around our community to help educate. We don't want to put anyone in harm's way, of course not. But maybe there's a way to do something like that that will really get some interesting, open dialogue and conversation going. So just the thought to put in your back pocket to consider. But again, thank you. I also want to thank Billy Callahan, who is the tech guru behind all this work. Fantastic, amazing woman. Love working with her. But thank you all. Have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you next month, I sure hope. Okay?
All
Bye.
right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.